Ursula's return set championships are less than a week away, and who better to tell you what to play than somebody who's already won an Ursula? As you may already be aware, the decks being played in the meta have been fairly static since the Chicago Challenge. However, the contents of those decks have been evolving, and I'm sure we'll see some awesome adaptations from Bochum this weekend. For now, I'm going to give my thoughts on which are the best decks in the meta and some examples of them that can give you a good starting point for figuring out what to play in set championships this July. Starting off, we have Sapphire Steel, my one true love in Disney Lorcana. Starting off, we have Brennan DeCandio's list from top 8 of the Chicago Challenge. This is a wheel, whole new world list, and like looking at any wheel list, it's very chaotic with lots of different tech cards. So let's quickly go through the most notable sections that are most relevant to your set championships. Firstly, the 8 popsicles, or 4 Fortisphere 4 popsicles, make this deck incredibly consistent. Sapphire tends to have a lot of spare ink to throw around, so with 8 cycle cards, you're virtually playing with a 52 card deck. Secondly, for Diablo answers, which are very necessary in this meta, we have 3 Baboom and 2 Magic Broom. For ramp, we're running 4 1 jump ahead and 4 quill. 1 jump tends to be better when we want to ramp straight into Haram and Tala and get some early board control with Zeus. This is a great option going second on the draw, whereas Fishbone Quill is incredibly strong on the play, as we can ramp, set up a 5-cost singer, and then keep ramping to dump our whole hand and then wheel. This creates an overwhelming resource advantage which lets us control the board with our removal tools and large threats. Quill can also be great on the draw when in a wheel mirror, as we can benefit from that draw 7 just as much as they can. The only situation where Quill can be harmful is into discard, as it burns through hand size very quickly. In that sort of situation, you'd prefer to just play 1 jump, or if you're running a different list, Mickey Mouse Detective. As for some techs into the other big 4 decks, we have Hard-Headed Beast for the mirror and red-blue, to remove quills and dimes, and we have Rise of Titans to do the same thing, but also notably to remove locations like Queen's Castle, which have become an increasingly large threat within the meta. As for the red-blue matchup, we also have Lucky Dime, Ariel, and Tamatoa. Recently, red-blue hasn't been running Judy Hop, so often this dime has a very high chance of sticking onto the board, and this is the only way we're going to be able to reliably push lore once red-blue has the removal online. Now, you may be wondering what deck I won my Ursula with set championships, and well, it was Sapphire Steel, but this time I was running Sky's no-wheel version. If you want a really in-depth explanation of the deck along with an interview, go check out the debut episode of my new series, Play Like a Pro, where we interviewed Sky on their placement in the Chicago Challenge and the benefits and drawbacks of not running a whole new world within the Sapphire Steel list in set 4. Now, the only thing I changed from their list for this tournament was cutting 2 Fire Cannons for 2 Rise of Titans, as I felt Queen's Castle was a much bigger threat than aggro. And spoiler alert, but that decision really cost me in my semi-final match against Specky, a friend of the channel and fellow content creator who was running Purple Steel Hyper Aggro. Since this event, I've now fit 2 Fire Cannons back in and made a few other changes, but I'm going to be keeping those secret so that at least some of my list is private going into the Bochum Challenge. Unless I decide I want to swap to some random rogue deck last minute like I did with Jafar, Wheel, and Lil. But if you haven't or won't go watch the interview, the key takeaway from the no-wheel list regarding set championships is that I believe your matchups into Ruby Amethyst, Ruby Sapphire, and even the Sapphire Steel Mirror are all improved by the removal of a whole new world, as we're running more threats and no longer filling our opponent's hand with answers to our board. This changes the deck's playstyle to be a lot more mid-rangey, but it's very effective in my opinion. And in my testing so far, Emerald Steel has been a free win every time. This deck, I think, counters it the best out of any list in the Big 4. Emerald Amethyst is an ink combo that has certainly flown under the radar throughout set 4. This list of Jordan Moore got 2nd place at Chicago, and yet we still haven't seen it top in any other large tournaments, which makes me think that all the green-purple players from set 3 have probably switched to Emerald Steel or Ruby Amethyst. The Amethyst core is mostly the same as we see in Purple Steel and Ruby Amethyst, with the key difference being running 2 Crab and 3 Ursula. Now, 2 Crab is honestly such an underrated card in the meta, as it helps clear opposing castles from hand by synergizing with Fox, and clear larger threats with more stats like Tamatoa. And then the Ursula is just a big body that quests but can help turn your small Ursulas into potential threats that have to be respected by opposing removal, and you get to tack on the ability to exert opposing characters when questing, and to a lesser extent prevent singing of songs, so you have a pretty amazing boss card in the mid to late stages of the game that help you control the board and hopefully protect your board too by preventing free usage of songs. The true key to this deck, however, is much like Specky's deck, it aims to punish lists that are too greedy and aren't running a lot of early game board presence / removal. with cards like Merfolk, Pegasus, and Flynn Rider to push some early game lore and a Shift Pegasus to add some evasive resilience to the board. Along with everyone's most hated Greenbird Diablo and some early game tempo manipulation in Jacques and Kit Cloud Kicker, you have a really strong tempo list that can go fast when needed, but still win the aggro mirror and have a few answers in the late game too. Emerald Steel Bucky Diablo Discard. That string of 5 words likely incites a lot of frustrations for every Lorcana player, including the ones playing the deck, because the mirror sucks. I wouldn't know though, as I refuse to play a deck like this unless it's literally the only viable deck in the meta. This is because I'm not a big fan of decks that limit my own play options, hence I play a lot of Sapphire decks and decks with lots of card draw. It's just not a very fun playstyle for me. However, what makes this deck so potent, especially for set championships, and so frustrating, is the asymmetry of being able to discard all our opponent's card with Bucky the Squirrel, while we get to draw a bunch of cards from our green little bird Diablo. Pair that with an arsenal of singable removal and discard in Sudden Chill that can be double sung by Karaoke Ursula, but let's just say that your opponent's in for a bad time. And once you're out of cards, as we see in the Rats list, Evasive Flynn Rider can finish you off with some 4 lore quests. Honestly, I think we've all heard enough about Emerald Steel. I've certainly had enough talking about it for the past month, so I'll keep it brief. Just be aware that this deck is a great pick for set championships, as likely the average player's deck is not teched for Bucky Diablo. So if you play this list well, you can probably make top 8 more so than any other decks in the meta, and then all you need to do is win one more match to get that Ursula. Amber Emerald Tempo Songs is the only deck profile I've done this set, and it had me really excited week 1 and 2. Joseph Quigley here even made top 32 at Chicago. My only concern is that a deck like this does best into other aggro/mid-range decks, especially with the Muses song package. But with how greedy the meta has become among the big 4, I think this list would need to be adapted to be a lot faster in order to be viable. I think Under the Sea is a really nice tech card into Emerald Steel especially, but now that they're running resilience tech cards like Hidden Cove, even that isn't a guarantee anymore unless you have all the correct answers like Painting the Roses red to lower your opponent's attack. If you want a fun deck to play that people don't know how to play around, I recommend giving this deck a shot and bringing it to set championships. But I don't think we'll be seeing a lot of it at top tables in Bochum now that the meta is so developed to tech into discard strategies. Amethyst Steel Hyper Aggro. This is Specky's list that went undefeated in the media set championships 10-0, and really took me by surprise. I was overwhelmed game 1 with no early game answers and completely bricked game 2 with multiple heavy cards in 3 Tamatoa, 2 Hades, and a Diamond hand for my opening turns. Now, with that being said, I think it's a really strong medical. Probably the best of the rogue decks, but I don't think it's quite tier 1 because if you just tech a little bit for the matchup, it's a lot less scary. Now that I've fit 2 5 cannons back into my list, I think it'd be a lot closer of a match. Really, the whole idea of this list is to punish how greedy the big 4 were getting with focusing on late game removal and late game threats. This deck will go under with Chernobogs, Maleficent, Smees, Snakes, and Benjers to remove your items. Along with a little bit of steel removal and 4 castles plus a book to close the games out, I can easily see this deck topping at DLC Bochum and winning quite a few set championships against those unprepared to this meta development. I'm still not so sure on the efficacy of the 2 bells, but I'd have to see the meta develop a bit more before I make a judgment. And finally, I gotta point out how cheap this deck is. If you're just getting into the game, this is a perfect list to try at set champs to see if you like competitive Lorcana without having to spend too much money. Ruby Sapphire was seen as the best deck at the start of a set, and for good reason too, as it got a myriad of new tools, most notably the Sisu Brawl Ice Block package. Because of this, we've seen Red-Blue have a lot easier of a time stabilizing against aggressive low-curve decks, whereas previously a rogue Hyper Aggro list might have just guaranteed you a loss in the tournament to punish you for going full greedy control. This have our cake and eat it too strategy is only counterbalanced by the threat of Diablo, forcing us to run 4 copies of Brawl, an arguably bad card, and 2 copies of Vitalisphere to hedge against the poor Ruby Amethyst matchup. The fact that among the big 4, Ruby Amethyst and Emerald Steel are the most teched for is another reason I think they're probably the best decks in the meta right now. But Red-Blue is not far behind. Red-Blue also has a nice matchup in traditional Sapphire Steel decks because we're really happy when they play a whole new world to refill our hand with answers to their question. Our Tamatoas are also pretty threatening, along with the extra items from Ice Block and Vitalisphere, making our dime game closer very, very strong. However, unlike the last list we saw top at the Chicago Challenge from Tomas, this list is not running Great Stone Dragon in favor of Free Quill. The only thing I'd be careful of when choosing this deck for locals is if you have a lot of Hyper Aggro and or Ruby Amethyst players, you might have a hard time being able to survive those early turns. Ruby Amethyst is a deck that has never quite left the meta ever since Lorcana's release. Again, we go deeper into this on the second episode of the Play Like a Pro series where we interviewed Noimnot, the guru of Ruby Amethyst, so go check that out if you want a really in-depth explanation of the deck. Now, this version by Lucas Serrano from the CCS 10K lowered the 1-drop count to 4 Churnabogs in order to fit more removal. I think this really pays off into red, blue, and blue steel, as these decks run a lot of high-value characters, and you need efficient answers to threats like Tamatoa. Obviously, the Flynn Sisu Castle line is a menace of an opener to any deck, but even just a Rabbit Goat on 4 into a Sing Bee King Undisputed into a Castle on 5 is enough to swing the tempo of a match. And obviously, with any Amethyst list, the Bounce package plus Friends is still an insane resource engine, especially to fight against Emerald Steel's Discard with a game plan of maintaining hand size until we can hit our Be Prepared. The removal especially is incredibly strong this set. Before, Tremaines and Medusas and Be Prepared were all you had to worry about on 6 and 7, other than a Maui on 5, and obviously, the Fox early on 3. But now you even have to worry about Bee King Undisputed on 4, or even being sung on 5. Ruby Amethyst has definitely evolved into more of a lower curve tempo list. Its removal is just as strong as ever, and even maybe more scary than just the set 1 Be Prepared we were worried about way back when. Ruby Amethyst's worst matchup into the Big 4 though is definitely Emerald Steel, and yet it's still a very winnable matchup, and being favored into the other 2, Red, Blue, and Blue Steel, I think this makes Ruby Amethyst the best deck in the meta for set championships and the Bochum Challenge. Redfasa is a deck that I love, and I had a lot of hope for going into set 4, as it probably got some of the most improvements out of any deck, even more so than Red Blue. But honestly, especially post-Chicago Challenge, I just don't think it's a good pick for set champs or Bochum. Emerald Steel is simply far too prevalent of the list, and absolutely mops the floor with Redfasa. This list, however, did make top 64, and so did another Redfasa list, and the Mulan Shift package is very cool, but unfortunately, I just don't think it's the right meta for Mufasa yet. I think its only favorable matchup in the Big 4 would be Ruby Amethyst, and you could make an argument beating the best deck is a good thing, but I think struggling into so many other decks like Amber Steel, Emerald Steel, really just anything Steel, means it's a hard bring to a especially competitive tournament. We'll probably see it win some set championships though. Amber Amethyst is a pretty funny list. To a degree, it plays itself, and is incredibly fragile. One board wipe and it is over. In set 3, we did see Atlanta be taken down by a non-Hyper Aggro Perdita Swarm version, however I think we're unlikely to see a repeat of that this set. The main thing to take away with this deck is that it is the literal definition of a glass cannon. If you think your locals is all red, blue, blue, steel, bring it, roll the dice, and hope you get to go first twice to win the best of 3. However, if you think you're playing more tempo mid-range decks, this simply isn't a list worth bringing, because you can't play around its weaknesses. You have exactly one game plan, and that's quest till you can't quest no more. There are a few additions in this version of the list in set 4, but I don't think they're good enough to really warrant playing the deck. Steel is simply far too prevalent. Red-blue now has answers to Hyper Aggro. I think you're going to have a very, very, very tough time winning in this meta, unless you get super lucky and your opponent brick. Amber Steel, piloted by none other than the GOAT of flutes, Zach Bivens. They placed top 32 in Chicago during a meta where everyone thought Amber Steel was done for and no longer viable due to its painful matchup with the meta-dominant red-blue. One plus to this list is I believe it has a really strong matchup into Emerald Steel, and I assume Ruby Amethyst too, as it has been in previous sets. Another thing to note in this meta is how reliant the Dime decks have become on sticking Tamatoa as a threat, and with World's Greatest Criminal Mind, Amber Steel actually has an incredibly efficient answer for the card, and others like it, for example Sisu and Simba. This forces these decks to play lower to the ground or threats with Ward like Aerial Treasure Seeker, which is where Amber Steel can hopefully find enough time to sing its flutes and close out the game. In previous sets, Flute Songs did play some more late game threats or anti-aggro tools like Big Tinkerbell and Big Cinderella, but with how good the Sapphire decks are at late game, it seems better to just run a lower curve and try to go under them. One notable omission I see is the Philo TT's hero package that everyone thought would really evolve the list at the start of set 4. Unfortunately, it seems it was too easily removed and countered, so it's been removed from the list to make the list more streamlined and a little bit less greedy on being able to stick with Philo TTs for some extra lore gain. However, if you are thinking of what to bring to set champs, I'd be very careful bringing this list. Flute Songs is a very high skill expression deck, and to play it in an unfavorable meta like Zach did, you really need to understand it deeply. Otherwise, you may struggle into the big 4 meta decks. Thanks for watching, guys. It's been a very hectic month, and when I'm back from Bochum, I'll definitely work on editing the Media Set Championships vlog, as that was an incredibly cool experience. I can't wait to share it with you all. One last thing I do want to shout out is that Ravensburger asked me to tell you all about the official Disney Lorcana store Locator. With the recent developments regarding online play, it's more important than ever that you get involved with your local stores to keep the community thriving. It's also a great way to find out where you can compete in set championships this July. I know personally, once I get back from Bochum, I've got my eye on about 5 set champs to attend, so it's going to be a very busy month of Lorcana. Hopefully I can redeem myself and get a champion playmat this time. Thanks for watching, and good luck in your tournaments this month. May the die roll be ever in your favor.